Good morning to you. Now, for a long time, certainly all my political lifetime, we have enjoyed a peaceful and largely consensual system of politics. We may have disagreed vehemently about many big things, about peace and war, poverty, leaving the European Union, but in every row we have had, we have mostly left violence at the door. Now, following the death of Joe Cox MP, the hideous killing of another parliamentarian, Sir David Amess, going about his civic and political duty, helping ordinary constituents, not political players, makes us rethink. There are few phrases more often and glibly used than "it's an attack on democracy," but this week that is exactly what it was. So how can we best balance the conflicting needs for MPs to freely meet their constituents and their physical safety? I'm joined live in the studio by Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, a neighbouring MP to David Amess and a close personal friend. Talking about that and the rising COVID numbers, one of Joe Cox's friends, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Lisa Nandy. But there's so much else to talk about. We're very close to what looks like a finely balanced and difficult global conference on the world climate in Glasgow, coming at a time when millions of families are worried about how to heat their homes in the coming months. I've been talking to the Russian ambassador to the United Kingdom, Andrey Kelin, and I'm joined in the studio by the United States' acting ambassador to the UK, Philip T. Rieker. Reviewing the news, Jane Moore of The Sun and Christiana Figueres, the UN's former global warming chief. But let's begin with the news headlines from Seema Katecha.
Morning, Andrew. The man arrested by police following the killing of the Essex MP Sir David Amess has been named as Ali Harbi Ali. The 25-year-old is being held under the Terrorism Act and officers have until Friday to question him. Last night, a candlelit vigil was held in tribute to Sir David, who was stabbed multiple times during a constituency surgery on Friday. Sir David is the second MP to be killed in recent years following the murder of Labour MP Joe Cox in July 2016. The British-Iranian aid worker Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has lost an appeal against her second jail sentence in Iran. She was jailed for 5 years in 2016 after being accused of spying, which she has always denied. She was then sentenced to another year's confinement in April on charges of spreading propaganda. Train services on the rail network that connects Kent and parts of East Sussex to London come under government control today. Last month, it was announced that the operator, South Eastern, would be stripped of its franchise after failing to declare more than £25 million of taxpayer funding. All previously purchased tickets, including season tickets, remain valid. And British tennis success in the United States might not be done just yet. Cameron Norrie is into his first Masters final after cruising past Grigor Dimitrov in Indian Wells. That's all from me now. The next news on BBC One is at 1 o'clock. Over to you, Andrew.
Many thanks, Seema. And now to the front pages, though you almost don't need me to tell you what's on them. There has been a lot of work by the editorial teams. The Sunday Telegraph says that the murder suspect had been flagged to counter-extremism officials in the past. And the Sun has a very similar story. MP's killer on terror alert list, it says. We'll be talking about that later on, I'm sure. The Mail on Sunday, killer plot attack on MP, has been planning this for a week, it says. And again, there's a lot more inside about that. We'll be talking about that. The Sunday Times has a slightly different story about the last phone call that David Amess made before he was killed. A very, very sad and wrenching story, that. The Observer has the Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Leslie Hoyle, saying that we must have a new mood, a new atmosphere in politics. We must end the hatred aimed at our MPs. I remember exactly the same thing being said after the murder of Joe Cox, and of course nothing happened except things got worse. So the Sunday Mirror has terror will not win from the left, and on the right of the spectrum, the Sunday Express, we won't let terror win. So that's both sides of the spectrum saying exactly the same thing. To review these papers, Jane Moore and Christiana Figueres, welcome to you both. Jane, let's start with the awful story about Sir David Amess.
Yeah, so we have this spread here in the Sun on Sunday, Train Ride to Murder, and it basically documents that the alleged killer lives in North London and got on a train, 50-mile journey to kill Sir David Amos. And as you mentioned there, it says here that he hadn't been on the subject of interest list with MI5, but he had been referred to the early signs of the government prevent anti-terror scheme as somebody that might be susceptible to radicalisation. But of course, we don't know yet the details of what the motive was. But it says here that several witnesses at the scene said that this young man didn't have a booking with Sir David. He turned up ad hoc. He was ushered in. Now, of course, this is going to reignite the debate again as to what security measures there should be in place.
So presumably he wasn't a constituent?
No, although it does says he may have family ties in the area, but no, he didn't live in the constituency. But again, you know, are we now going to see, so terror will not win? Great.
So,
but are
exactly.
you know, when you do your constituent, are people now going to have to be searched on arrival for weapons? You know,
it's a real dilemma, isn't it? I said right at the beginning of the show it was a dilemma and a difficult balance, because our whole system is based on MPs being able to freely move around and to meet their constituents, people who might have problems over bus stops or job issues or housing issues, being able to go and see their MP face to face as we're sitting here. And if you take that out, then the whole system begins to kind of wobble.
But I think it may be that they will still be able to see them, but they might have to either walk through a metal detector or as I say, be searched.
A policeman on the door.
And the other, Brendan Cox, widow of Joe Cox, I interviewed Brendan not long after Joe was killed, and also her sister, I interviewed her, Kim Leadbeater, and they've both done pieces today. And it just conveys the wider issue here of the repercussions on families. Obviously, Sir David had 5 children. He's got a very long marriage. And Brendan is saying here that, you know, a friend rang him to tell him about this, and the second he heard, he just cried because he was back on the day that Joe was attacked.
And as I said earlier on, I mean, we had at that time lots of talk about we must have a new attitude in politics, less hate, less abuse online and in person. And Brendan Cox has sort of devoted his life since then to combating hate in politics. And yet here we are again.
Yeah, here we are again. And it's great. You know, in an ideal world, there would not be this hatred. So in the meantime, how are MPs going to move forward regarding their own personal safety?
It is a tricky balance, isn't it, between making dialogue or harboring dialogue as the basis of democracy, as it is in all democracies, and assuring security. But I have to tell you, killing political leaders for hatred or for dissenting with their views is also mirrored on the other side with killing, for example, environmental activists, right? So in developing countries, we see that all too often. And I think what we have to remember is that silencing a voice that you don't agree with doesn't silence the issue. In fact, very often it actually even gives a megaphone to that issue. So it is not even, for those who want to silence the issue, it's not even, in addition to being absolutely appalling.
It's evil, but also counterproductive.
Exactly. And there's a piece here regarding Tulip Sadiq is saying that she estimates she receives an abusive message every day on social media and a violent threat, such as that she will be raped, murdered, or her whole family, and I quote, butchered every 3 weeks. This can't be allowed to continue. Obviously, there is going to be pressure also on social media companies to maybe stamp down on this kind of thing. But a lot of people are saying this morning also that verbal threats against MPs is an issue, but it must be separated from actual violence carried out like we've seen on Sir David Amos.
Christiana, I said the other great issue facing the country this morning, or one of the other great issues facing the country, is the climate change conference coming up. Now, you were in many ways responsible for the success of the Paris conference climate accord. From that perspective, just before we look at the papers, how do you think they are doing this time round, and how difficult does it look to you?
Well, it is definitely difficult. It's difficult because these yearly conferences, when the 26th is happening, now at the end of this year in Glasgow. But these yearly conferences unavoidably happen in the context of current geopolitics. And current geopolitics is not very conducive to dialogue right now, and certainly not to cooperation. And yet, we have to be able to see beyond the immediate concerns to the medium and long term, because we know that there is a difficulty here in the timing. We know that over the next 9 years, which from a politician's perspective is basically right now, over these 9 years, we have to be able to cut emissions to 1/2 of where they are today by the year 2030. And that means that we need the policies right now.
And everybody's observing this, saying there's lots and lots of talk, but very little action, including the Queen herself.
Exactly.
Everyone from Greta Thunberg to the Queen.
Yes. I mean, here we see her, smiling, but that is an Ascot smile. That is not a global climate change smile. She quite rightly is calling out world leaders. And I think all the royals are absolutely of one voice, as is everyone else, that we do need world leaders, politicians, CEOs, heads of financial sectors, everyone. This is not just a responsibility of national governments. This is an all-hands-on-deck responsibility.
And how do you feel, because it's just interesting you say that, because I think it's very interesting that the Queen has got involved, because she doesn't normally
normally do those things.
But then there's also a lot of people watching this that would say, well, the royal family with their many, many houses and,
helicopters,
gas
and
guzzler cars, etc. We don't want to hear that from them. So it's kind of like, is it helpful or is it a hindrance?
No, I do think it's helpful. I do think it's helpful because, well, first of all, we know that Prince Charles has been a champion of this for a long time.
Yes.
Prince William now following in that tradition. And it's wonderful that the Queen herself is coming out, because she is a voice of authority. She is a moral authority, not only in the UK, but worldwide.
Yeah.
Let's turn to, as it were, normal politics, ordinary politics.
Is
because
there such a thing?
There is such a thing, I'm afraid. The Conservatives quite clearly, Jane, have a tough winter ahead, don't they?
Yeah, they do indeed. The Mail on Sunday has done a poll, and here we see the headline. Tory poll lead shrinks to 1 point, but Boris is still streets ahead of Starmer. So, of course, what we have here is the Labour-Tory divide is close, but when it gets down to the sort of the personality politics, which, is maybe summed up by who is the best person to go for a drink with, Boris wins hands down. So he gets 47.
Is there a but coming?
Yeah, well, no. Well, the but is that he doesn't make a great husband, according to this poll. But his popularity carries him through. But of course, in terms of serious issues, he has a problem.
And in terms of serious issues, very interesting read through in the Times by Tim Shipman there about the growing tensions between Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, and Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister. And of course, everybody has been watching this Brown Blair documentary on television on the BBC and looking for parallels.
This is a great piece, actually. I mean, I love the sort of the graphics there of which sort of sums Rishi up as the serious one, and Boris obviously as someone that doesn't want to listen to the word no. And Tim Shipman, has very good contacts in Westminster, and he's saying exactly what you've said. People who watch the Blair Brown documentary say they fear that they've got that coming up with these two, that Rishi's put out by the appointment of Liz Truss. Rishi has become Dr. No, while Liz is Mrs. Yes, 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 says a former minister. So, he's got his much sort of leaked financial declarations on October the 27th coming up. But
it'll be a big moment, that budget, probably quite a tough budget. We're all going to be watching that very closely. Now then, Christiana, you are on television this morning, as everyone can see, and you're on television again this evening on BBC One for the Earthshot Prize. Just tell us about the Earthshot Prize before we finish.
The Earthshot Prize is arguably the most distinguished environmental prize ever, founded and led by Prince William himself. And it is a very exciting day in London, but also around the world, because the 5 winners of this will be announced today. We have 15 finalists, 5 different sections, 15 finalists, and the 5 winners will be announced today. What Prince William is really trying to do here, and I think the word earthshot is the explanation, he's trying to highlight initiatives that have the best chance of getting us to where we need to go.
So it's a positive thing. 8 o'clock, BBC One tonight.
Indeed.
Christiana, Jane, thank you both very much indeed for that. And so to the weather, some gorgeous days last week, but also, quite clearly, autumn's properly arrived and winter isn't so very far away. Over to Ben Rich in the weather studio. Ben.
Hi there, Andrew. Thank you. Very good morning to you. It's going to feel like autumn in some respects over the next couple of days, in the sense that we will have some cloud, we'll have some rain, it'll be quite windy. But actually, in other respects, it'll feel like autumn is being delayed because there is some very mild, even warm weather on the way. But today we've got cloud, we've got outbreaks of rain drifting eastwards, and even as the heavy rain clears, we'll be left with a legacy of cloud and some spots of drizzle into the afternoon. The brightest spots, I think, across northern Scotland, also southern England, parts of South Wales and the Midlands, and down towards the south could see highs of 18 degrees. Tonight it stays mild, it stays largely cloudy with some spots of drizzle, some mist and murk in places. Those are your overnight lows. And then for tomorrow, again, a lot of cloud in the forecast. We will see some outbreaks of rain pushing from the west towards the east. A bit of early sunshine perhaps across eastern England, northeast Scotland, but it'll tend to cloud over here as the day wears on. But again, those temperatures respectable for the time of year, 14 to 18 degrees. And as we get into Tuesday, those temperatures have further to climb. Southerly winds bringing some very, very mild air northwards across the UK. With that, there'll still be cloud, there'll still be outbreaks of rain, but get some sunshine. You could see highs of 20 or 21 degrees. However, for the end of the week, northerly winds return, and by then it will feel cooler and more autumnal. Andrew.
Well, I prefer cold and dry to warm and wet myself. My first guest this morning is the acting American ambassador to the UK, Philip T. Rieker. Ambassador, before we start to talk about other issues, we've of course had this terrible news this week about Sir David Amess. Now, I know that in America, legislative politicians have been attacked physically and so on. Do you think we are now heading to a phase, partly because of social media perhaps, where politicians of different kinds just have to step back from the general public a bit?
Well, first, Andrew, let me thank you for inviting me this morning, and let me offer again our deepest condolences on behalf of myself, our team at the U.S. Embassy here in the UK, and of course you've seen Secretary Blinken's message on behalf of the American people as well on this shocking and really terrible event, the murder of Sir David, whom I never had the opportunity or honor to meet, but I can tell from the coverage, the reporting, he's a remarkable man. This is a time of challenge for democracy, as has been reported, as you've discussed. We feel this strongly. Anything that happens in the United Kingdom, we feel across the Atlantic in the U.S. I think we've got to have resolve. We've got to be firm. We cannot act with fear and anger, but rather with determination to see democracy forward. And President Biden himself has talked about this broadly as a period of inflection where democracy must prove itself over autocracy.
Let me ask you then about the climate change conference coming up, probably the biggest international gathering, certainly in the world this year, the world perhaps for many years. We now know, or we read, that President Xi of China isn't coming. I've interviewed the Russian ambassador, and from that it makes it clear that President Putin may not be coming either. If the presidents of the world's most emitting country and fourth most emitting country don't turn up, can this conference actually succeed?
Well, what I can tell you is that President Biden is coming. You've seen that announcement from the White House with an extremely robust delegation from across the U.S. government. Every agency, every department is a climate agency in our government, and this extends beyond government to being a whole of society approach as well. This is a priority for the president. He spoke about that with Prime Minister Boris Johnson when they met in the Oval Office a few weeks ago. I was there. Obviously, this is an opportunity to build on what we've done to reassure and reestablish the ambition we have. Special Envoy Kerry has talked about this, and I think what is key is what comes out of this in terms of the decade ahead, a decade that will be decisive in meeting those important goals established by Paris, and America is very much back in that process.
You have a 1.5 degree goal. Many climate activists look at what the administration is actually doing and think that you're not doing nearly enough and you're not entirely serious. Let's just hear one of them.
the Biden administration doesn't seem to take the climate crisis the least bit serious, since they are actually expanding fossil fuel infrastructure. So it shows that they are not ready to take action, which is unfortunate, but it was expected, unfortunately.
So what would you say to Greta Thunberg?
I would respectfully disagree and point out that President Biden has made very clear our focus on this, the importance of this. He has announced not once but twice a doubling, therefore a double doubling of the amount we're putting forward in terms of finance to help other countries, developing countries, meet their goals. And this will very much be discussed in Glasgow in the coming weeks.
But she was saying that, you know, you're forging ahead with fossil fuel infrastructure. And looking at what's going on in America, she's right about that. Looking at what's publicly available in the States in terms of information, the Biden administration has so far approved 2,100 permits for companies to drill for oil and gas on US public lands this year.
And if you look at what they're doing in terms of innovation, new technologies, renewables, the announcement just this very week of wind, and building of infrastructure across the coasts for wind. This is very much the focus of the president's infrastructure legislation, which is now being debated in Congress. He's determined to see movement on this as we build back better from recovery of COVID and focus on a green agenda. There has to be a transition here, Andrew, and that's very much what this is about.
You're roaring ahead on oil and gas. The research group Oil Change International says there are at least 21 major fossil fuel infrastructure projects waiting on desks around Washington. Can you at least say they won't go ahead?
They will transition. We're transitioning. We're already seeing this from carbon-based, hydrocarbon energy sources to renewables, to nuclear, to other areas. The same thing you're doing here in the United Kingdom, across Europe, across the world. And this is very much what the COP discussion focuses on.
But this is very difficult because it's about consumption. It's about how people actually live. And we know that the average American emits far more CO2 than Chinese or Indians or indeed Europeans. You emit more per person than anybody else in the world. And I do understand that it's very difficult to get people to change their lifestyles, and that there is quite a lot of scepticism still about climate change in the United States. But we've seen a year again with terrible forest fires ravaging the West Coast. We've seen the typhoons and the hurricanes on the East Coast of Florida. Are those events changing America's mind about climate change?
I think there is a real focus and realization on this. This is real. This is happening. And you do see across the United States a movement, particularly in the younger generations, where there is great interest, great focus. Greta speaks for that generation in many ways. And the president is responding to that. John Kerry, who has traveled the world focusing on engaging, building the impetus to move ahead, rejoining Paris as we have, getting the funding, working with Congress on this is all part of this, but it comes from a grassroots level too.
So what would success at COP look like?
I think, again, COP is the beginning of a decisive decade. It brings together all the work we've done. America is back since January, when the Biden administration came in and rejoined the Paris process.
But in specific terms, what do you need to see out of that conference?
We want to see a dedication to the goals of reaching the 1.5, heading toward net zero in terms of carbon. It's very ambitious, and it needs to be. And that means over that decade, seeing what we're doing. You're seeing things like the Earthshot. I have great admiration for what the Duke of Cambridge is doing with that to promote these environmental, climate-conscious efforts, and the innovation that's going on right around the world is really quite remarkable.
Thinking about UK-US trade, many people would say the quickest route for the UK to get a comprehensive deal with the United States is to wait for a Trump re-election.
I think we need to focus on what is the reality today. $220 billion in trade between the first and fifth largest economies in the world, the United States and the United Kingdom,
no new
united
trade
in
deal.
that.
No new trade deal.
Trade deals, again, are part of a longer process to look at ways that we can eliminate barriers that do exist. But what we have to focus is on what we do have, and that is this enormous level of trade as well as two-way investment. And we see that growing as we emerge from COVID.
As we sit down to get this new trade deal, does everything have to be on the table?
I think you can go step at a time. We made some progress on what were known as small ruminants. The announcement that was made at the time of the Prime Minister's visit to Washington, working now to remove the barriers to British lamb, for instance, imports. So we can look at a range of these things, but we have to keep our eye on what really is important, not the sort of headline of a trade agreement idea, but rather the trade that we're doing, which is growing all the time.
I'm sticking with the possibility of a trade deal, however, doggedly. Things like the price of medicine, access to the National Health Service, the way food is produced, do those things have to be on the table for a trade deal to be agreed with America?
That's really a matter for our U.S. trade representative in terms of working on that. A trade deal also involves the Congress, which is far more complex than what we do at the executive level. And there's a lot going on before Congress right now. The president discussed with the Prime Minister his agenda, that is President Biden's agenda before Congress. We need to get our own house in order in terms of building back the economy after COVID and working to make our economy strong, and trade will be a big part of that.
Now, President Biden has announced very clearly that British people can go to the States again as tourists or as visitors. We have very high COVID rates in this country, rising at the moment. Could that agreement be revoked again? Could that permission be revoked?
I think what we're delighted to see is the announcement that as of November 8th, there'll be a new way forward on this, as the president had earlier announced. Those who are vaccinated, and you've done a marvelous job in this country in vaccination, which has made all the difference. And we're waiting for the specifics and details of how the two-jab approach will be monitored, will be recorded, and allow travel. So lifting this travel ban that was put in place, obviously, as we faced the pandemic a year and a half ago.
So we could rely on going to the States again, can we?
I think that's what we can see, and as of November, many people can go for Thanksgiving.
I have been quite properly calling you Mr. Ambassador during this interview, but you are in fact the interim ambassador, the chargé d'affaires. Chargé d'affaires, an old French phrase. When are we going to see a full-time ambassador?
Well, it's a process, Andrew, that takes time in our system. I expect that the president will nominate a new ambassador in the coming weeks or months. And then, of course, our Senate has a role in this, as laid out in our Constitution, to provide advice and consent. They have to confirm a new ambassador. In the meantime, Secretary Blinken and the president asked me to come here, having headed our European affairs at the State Department, and I'm delighted to be here working on behalf of our wonderful bilateral relationship.
Well, Ambassador Rika, I think you'll be here for Christmas. Thanks very much indeed for joining us for now.
Thank you.
I'm joined from Salford by the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Lisa Nandy. Lisa Nandy, as we start, can I just ask you first of all about the terrible news about Sir David Amess? You were a close friend of Joe Cox, so what are your reflections this morning?
I mean, I think most of us are just feeling like we can't believe this has happened. We can't believe it's happened to David. We can't believe it's happened again. I think a lot of MPs are in a state of shock. I first met David when I was first elected to Parliament. He was one of the first MPs that I met, and it was through some work on an all-party parliamentary group on children in care. I think what you've heard with the outpouring of love for him over the last few days is that he was so involved in so many things that were all about trying to improve the lives of people who often didn't have a voice, and he was willing to work with whoever it took in the political system in order to change that. I wish people could see that a lot of that does go on behind the scenes, for all the shouting and yelling that you get at PMQs and the sort of pantomime that plays out every week on a Wednesday. There are actually lots of MPs just quietly trying to make things better for people behind the scenes, and I wish more people knew that.
Yes, because we talk about trying to take some of the heat and aggression out of politics. I guess you probably disagreed with Sir David Amess about most of the big issues on Europe. There wasn't much you agreed with that, and yet you got on very well personally.
Yeah, apart from children in care, I'm not sure we worked on anything over the last 11 years where we agreed, but that's not the point. And in fact, democracy would be very poor if we did all agree. I've changed my mind on many things since I've been in Parliament, and it's often been because of my constituents or because of other MPs who've put forward arguments that in the end I thought were right. We've got to be free to speak freely, and that's why I think you're hearing from a lot of MPs that although this is heartbreaking and it does make you very anxious, none of us are going to stop doing our jobs as a consequence.
It's interesting you say that, because since this horrible killing, we've seen a lot of accounts of the really vile, personal and violent abuse faced by MPs, and I may say particularly female MPs. Do you feel safe doing your job, going around your constituency?
No, not really, if I'm honest. I feel quite fortunate to have a lot of constituents who are concerned about my safety. Wigan's that sort of place, people look after each other, and when they see things like this, my inbox this morning is absolutely full of people saying, you know, keep going and thank you, and I'm sure lots of MPs are getting the same thing. But you know, this isn't the first time this has happened. There was obviously, you referred to what happened to Jo, but Rosie Cooper, my neighbouring MP, there was a plot to kill her that was only discovered because of an organisation called Hope Not Hate, which found out that it was happening and alerted the police. My colleague Stephen Timms was stabbed several years ago. This is not the first time it's happened. Like you said, Andrew, it's not felt equally by all MPs. It's not just women. You know, there was a report by Amnesty International a few years ago that showed that Diane Abbott got half of all online hate directed at MPs, at her personally. And I think that the response from the police in many cases has been very good, but actually the response generally has not been. It's been far too patchy, and for some, we can't afford to get into a place where we're all trying to outdo each other about the risks that we're prepared to take in order to do this job. An attack on MPs is an attack on democracy because it silences the people who we represent, and so we've got to take this more seriously.
Exactly, yet you feel unsafe, and I suppose my question is whether you're going to change your behaviour in any way, because you mentioned Diane Abbott, and she said that she would prefer to do her constituency meetings behind a Perspex screen to make her safer.
I mean, I would totally support anybody who is taking measures in order to increase their personal safety, because we're all in very different situations. I mean, there are many MPs, for example, who've been told you need to do your surgeries in places where there's security. Try doing that if you're a rural MP in a constituency where there's very little public transport. People simply aren't going to be able to travel to the one place where there might be a community centre with security available. It's just not practical. So we need some proper advice and support that takes into account the different circumstances of MPs. I guess what I'm trying to say is that you're never going to be able to eliminate risk. There will always be risks because we're public figures and we're open and accessible. We're human beings. We pop to the shops. We have families. We go about our business. But there is more that can be done, particularly online, with the volume of abuse that we all have to put up with. When I come off this programme today, there'll be lots of it, and some of it will be threatening. No action has ever been taken about people who've threatened to harm me online, despite the fact that there's been reams of it over the last decade. I think that has got to change.
So specifically, there will be threats made against you online, physically, after this interview. Do you think the social media companies have the obligation and should be forced to publish the names of anonymous people attacking public figures like that?
So I think that people have to be held to account for what would be criminal behaviour in the real world if they indulge in it online. But I'm a bit cautious, we're a bit cautious about just simply ending anonymity on social media. I work with a lot of people, whether it's the women of Belarus or the pro-democracy campaigners in Hong Kong, whistleblowers as well, people for whom anonymity on social media can be life-saving. So the trick is to get the right balance. That's what we've been trying to do through the online safety bill. The government has dragged its feet on this for years. But the one thing that we really think there must be is that when we introduce a code for how social media companies should respond to online hatred on their sites, if they repeatedly breach that code or don't uphold it, we think there should be penalties for top executives. The government doesn't agree. We think that's completely wrong. Diane Abbott once described what goes on online as the Wild West, and for a lot of people it does very much feel like that. It's not just MPs, it's young people who are being driven offline because of the amount of hatred directed towards them at a really formative moment in their lives. We're supposed to be one of the best democracies in the world. We used to export our democracy all over the world. If we're going to lecture other countries about upholding democracy, we need to start doing better at living that and upholding these values at home.
Well, just picking up on being best in the world at things, our coronavirus rates are shooting up at the moment. Hospitalisations are going up, deaths are moving up slowly as well. Do you think that this winter the Labour Party should be supporting more restrictions again?
I mean, we'll obviously look at that. We listened to Jenny Harris on your programme the other week talking about some of the restrictions she thinks may or may not help. And we've always said that we'd want to be guided by the science. But as always, what we'd like to see is proper action on the things that we know are already a problem. So building ventilation, we still had very little in the way of action from the government on that, and that's a particular problem in schools. I'm very, very worried about the number of young people that are still missing large chunks of their education as a consequence. And in the end, our priority will be to make sure that we defeat this virus and that we come through the winter with the NHS not overwhelmed. So, of course, we'll support measures, sensible measures that can be implemented in order to do so.
All right, Lisa and Andy, thanks very much indeed for talking to us on this slightly serious morning, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now then, as gas prices continue to soar, there have been accusations that Russia is manipulating the situation to force through the approval of a new gas pipeline that would strengthen its hold on the world market. There's also new tensions with the UK after two BBC journalists, Andrey Kelin and Sarah Rainsford, were sanctioned by the regime. Sarah Rainsford is now banned from entering the country, where she has reported for years. Well, I sat down this week with Andrey Kelin, Russia's ambassador to the UK, and began with gas. Is Russia withholding supplies for political reasons?
Certainly we do not withhold it for political reasons. But Gazprom, this is not a pump station, of course.
The President has described allegations that this is politically motivated as blather, and yet the Deputy Prime Minister, Alexander Novak, said that Nord Stream 2, which is the gas pipeline running through to Germany, which is still being held up for approval, so he says approval would give a positive signal and cool off the current situation. So which of them is right?
I don't see any contradiction. Not at all. What is absolutely a fact of life is that the pipeline Nord Stream 2 does exist. It is ready. It is prepared for use, and we expect a final go ahead from Germany. So as soon as it will happen, then of course new gas supplies will come from this pipeline, which is shorter for 2,000 kilometers, which provides much cleaner gas because it is new and modern equipment, and the pipeline itself is very new and modern. And it is definitely cheaper than the gas which is going on right now.
So if the Germans don't give approval quickly, will Russia nonetheless carry on increasing the amount of gas for Western Europe?
For as much as we can do that, we have increased supplies via Ukraine pipeline by 10%. But as we understand, we cannot do more because the equipment at this pipeline has never been modernized and has never been reconstructed. So it is simply dangerous to use it.
We've looked at the publicly available data, and we can't see any evidence that Russia has increased supplies through the Ukraine by 10%.
Oh, it's as I'm not, once again, I am not a big specialist in that, but gas travels at not the speed of the light, of course. It goes very slowly by that. So what do you expect? Or once the president has said, and tomorrow prices will go down, this is not possible.
So are you saying, to be clear, you're doing everything you possibly can to get more gas and cheaper gas to Europe?
It is a very specific question for that.
Yes. Yeah.
But with, it is obvious that with the putting into work of Nord Stream 2 will facilitate the issue.
So the political worry, as you know, in Western Europe is that Nord Stream 2 gives Russia huge powers over the energy supplies to Europe. And in a sense, if you are displeased by something Western European governments are doing, you don't need missiles, you don't need a navy, you don't need an army, you just need a tap.
Very interesting. You know, I have a tap down here in the basement of my embassy, and it depends on me whether I will close it or open. Of course, it is nonsense.
Would it take the approval of Nord Stream 2 to get gas prices back to normal?
It's a question for really marketologists and specialists.
So from the 1st of November, whether there's approval or not, will gas supplies increase?
I cannot say this question. I simply do not know. But we have, as I said, we increase it by 15% right now, and I do believe that President knows what he is saying, first of all. And of course, he is certain. We fully believe that it has been done.
Does President Putin, do you understand quite the pressure that's being put on British families, European families, and their budgets, and indeed on European companies by this? It is a really, really big crisis point for Europe.
No, of course we do read, we watch what is happening in the United Kingdom, but United Kingdom, as far as I understand, has only the share of Gazprom here is about 3%. It is just nothing. But I would say, of course, if it will be an opportunity, we will come to rescue. We will do what we can, of course, to alleviate difficult conditions which are now being created, the real crisis.
Right. One of the other things the United Kingdom is doing is hosting the Climate Change Summit, COP, next month in Glasgow. We read that President Xi of China is unlikely to come. Is President Putin going to come?
As I understand, decision on his trip has not been taken yet, but we will send a large delegation. Believe me, it will be a delegation that will consist of more than 200 people. The government will be represented at very high level.
At the moment, Russia is one of the bigger polluters around the planet, bigger producers of carbon dioxide, I should say. Will the Russian team come to COP with concrete, clear plans about cutting carbon emissions inside Russia?
We take the issue very seriously, and we do believe that we need to work towards the goal of improving the situation. And you know that the day before yesterday, President has announced that we now have set a goal of reaching hydrocarbon neutrality by 2060. Like China, we are not very much in a hurry. We do not want to jump. We do not believe that putting artificial goals, it is not very much calculated goals, will help in this situation.
And yet this is a crisis for the whole planet, and that is a later date than many other countries are setting.
A later date it is not very much later date because the idea is to set up the goal of 2050. But at this moment, I can say by this time, we intend to have lower emissions than the whole Europe. So we have different plans simply.
All right. Well, let me ask you about Sarah Rainsford. She was told that she was a threat to the security of the Russian Federation. But nobody has explained to her or to the BBC what that means.
Wrong. Not only to her, but we have also explained it to Foreign Office and to the others that this step has been done because our journalists here are very badly treated, in a sense that they are being expelled a year earlier, and we just expect that situation will be reversed. Sarah has also been told that as soon as our correspondent of TASS news agency will receive a visa to enter United Kingdom, she may return.
So this is a tit-for-tat thing going on, and yet she was told at the border that she was a threat to the security of the Russian Federation.
I haven't
She
heard
wasn't,
that.
was she?
At which border was
At the Russian border.
At the Russian border.
Yeah.
Did you hear that yourself?
I mean, it may be that the reason for all of this is that she was returning from Belarus at the time, where she had been asking President Lukashenko some pretty tough questions. And perhaps that was connected.
No. This lady, as I have said, may return as when we will see that our journalists are getting a visa to enter the United Kingdom to work.
And yet she was told that she was being expelled because of, and I quote, activities hostile to the Russian Federation.
No,
what
you're
activities?
Repeating yourself. Well, in general, speaking about what is being written in the United Kingdom newspapers and press about Russia, it's very bad, I will say.
All right, well, let's turn to where she had been reporting from, which is Belarus. Do you think it's acceptable to forcibly ground a Ryanair jet, arrest two people on the jet, a journalist and his girlfriend, and then broadcast on state television a forced confession?
Mr. Marr, if you would like to put this question, continue this line of question, we have here nearby Ambassador of Belarus, and he will answer all your questions, believe me.
But Belarus and Russia are quite closely connected.
And
President
so
Putin and President Lukashenko were meeting quite recently.
Okay, can you imagine your foreign minister, Mrs. Truss, will speak up for something what is happening in France? I cannot.
All right, let me just ask you a very straightforward question. And do you think that Belarus is guilty of human rights violations?
There are some cases, perhaps, which are difficult. Of course, we have recently had a case with a journalist of Komsomolskaya Pravda over there, which we do not accept and support. But things happen everywhere. Things happen in the United Kingdom, things happen in the United States with human rights violations. For this, we have different organizations, one of them OSCE, Amnesty International, and all of that.
We both know that the record in Belarus recently has been pretty terrible. Do you think it should face sanctions internationally for what it has been doing?
Sanctions is a very bad instrument everywhere. It is only spoil the possibilities of re-establishing good normal relations.
Whether or not President Putin makes it to Glasgow for COP, do you think that he is in effect now president for life?
This question had been addressed to President Putin yesterday during the energy conference. He said that he did not commit, he did not decide what to do after 2024.
Ambassador Kelin, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for questions.
And Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, is with me now in the studio. Priti Patel, this has been a terrible shock for the whole country, the awful death of David Amess. But for you it's personal because he was a neighbour and a friend.
Well, good morning, Andrew. That's absolutely right. I knew David. I've known him for nearly 30 years. He was a dear, dear friend to me and a fellow Essex MP as well. So just the work we did together, the common causes, and as your viewers will appreciate, you know, when you're involved in grassroots party politics, you come up together through the grassroots, you support each other. And there are many, many campaigns that David and I have worked on, been together on, common causes, going to Southend to support him. You know, he'd come to me to support me as well. That was David through and through. And he just had this infectious personality and energy that I think has just touched so many lives.
And of course you are Home Secretary. How did you hear about this?
So tragically, I heard not long after the event actually took place on Friday, and we were on a away day. We had regional cabinet on Friday, so for me it was news that was coming through during then Friday afternoon. So as you can imagine, both as Home Secretary and David as my neighbouring MP, a close friend and colleague, I was desperate, absolutely desperate to find out everything that I possibly could around the circumstances. And then, quite frankly, our world was shattered as the news started to come together, the details emerged for all of us and for David's dear, dear family.
Now, he had tweeted the time, the place and the address of his constituency surgery and even put a photograph on so it was easy to identify. Do you think MPs are going to have to stop doing that now?
So, Andrew, there are a range of there are a lot of measures for MPs in terms of how they go about conducting their business, you know, and no great surprise, you won't be surprised with my instincts on this, how I feel about this. We're here to serve. We're here to be accessible to the British public, and our surgeries, our engagement, that's down to who we are and how we engage with the public. There are ways in which we can do things differently, clearly around surgeries. You've just mentioned, you know, publicising them, moving from publicising appointments to pre-booking appointments, making sure that appointments are checked thoroughly, that the backgrounds on individuals are checked. If I may say, a lot of those measures are already in place right now. Those measures are being looked at again, and the Speaker and I are working through. Actually, we're doing a lot of practical things right now in terms of advice for MPs. But I think it's fair to say we all have to be incredibly self-aware, conscientious as to how we conduct our business and put safety front and centre at this.
Do you think MPs should be offered police protection for their surgeries? They may not want to take it, but should they be offered it?
So there are protective measures available to members of Parliament. So there are a whole suite of measures, and many of these measures came together post Joe Cox's murder. So we have something called Operation Bridger that was stood up after the tragic murder of Joe. And with that, protective measures based upon MPs' engagement with the police, sharing information about, you know, your whereabouts, what you do, where you're going, events, surgeries, things of that nature, but also making sure that your risk is assessed in a thorough and practical way. There are a range of measures in place. So this isn't about just saying, you know, let's just go for option A, have bodyguards or security. There's a panoply of measures. and we have to be proportionate in terms of the risk individuals are subject to. And that is based on one-on-one engagement with the police who do those assessments.
I was talking to Lisa and Andy about the huge amount of abuse that MPs, but particularly women MPs and perhaps particularly women MPs of colour are getting at the moment. Some of it very, very vile and violent and personal. And whether or not social media companies should be obliged to make public the anonymous identities behind which some of these attacks happen.
So this isn't new. Let me be clear about that. I've been a Member of Parliament for same time as Lisa, actually, around 11 years. I can say this as someone that has been subject to a lot of abuse over a consistent period of time.
Did you feel unsafe before? I mean, Home Secretary, you get protection as Home Secretary.
Yes.
As an ordinary MP, did you feel unsafe?
I've always been conscientious about safety and my security because I've been subject to abuse from the first day I became a Member of Parliament. There are people that have been subject to police action, not just cautions, but have gone to court because of the abuse that has come my way. I just don't think abuse in public life from people, anonymous individuals, and even individuals that the police find is acceptable. We're elected politicians. We come into public life to be a force for good, effectively, to serve our constituents, to serve our country. But you've asked the question
about anonymity.
Around anonymity. There is legislation underway led by Department of Culture, Media and Sport, technology companies. I do a lot in the security space around online encryption. Believe you me, I am absolutely vigorous in my challenges to Facebook, to Twitter and to the CSPs, the providers, and we will continue to be so. There is this whole issue about anonymity, but it has to be proportionate and it has to be balanced. People also use media, social media, through anonymity for a range of pro-democracy movements, for example, and raising a range of other cases.
So you have to be careful.
We can't just apply, a binary approach. But there is something very, very corrosive. I mean, I will put aside I will put forward my own personal views right now. What we see on social media, much of it, and this isn't just about MPs at all, Andrew. I've seen children subject to the most appalling hate and abuse online. We know that social media platforms advocate all sorts of things that are harmful to all aspects of society. This is why the online harms bill is so important. And that is why I would say that, if nothing else, this is one area where all politicians can come together to really close that corrosive space where we see just dreadful behaviour, hate, we see suicide websites, we see all sorts of corrosive things online. This is what we really want to close down.
So there's a lot more to do. Can I ask about worries that have been expressed this morning that the long lockdown helped radicalise people, these so-called lone wolf attacks?
Sure.
Which obviously, are very, very hard to spot ahead of time and very hard to prevent.
It's a really important point, actually. It really is. Coronavirus, pandemic, people being locked down at home, online, etc. But what I would say, to put this into perspective, we have the best security and intelligence agencies in the world. Now, I know, I can't sit and share with you, I know how they worked throughout the pandemic. I know the work that they do in terms of watching individuals, subjects of interest, tracking behaviours, monitoring anybody of interest.
Are they worried about
their work is phenomenal, it's outstanding. Threats are always there, and if you listen to my colleague, even the Director General of MI5, he's spoken publicly about lone actors. When you speak about CT police leads, they speak about lone actors, and we've seen much more of that at both ends of the spectrum, by the way, Islamist and extreme right. But what I would say is that across our CT police, our intelligence policing and agencies, we have the best intelligence and security services in the world, and the work that we have put together more broadly in recent years, counter-terrorism operations centres, etc., looking at intelligence and fusing that with other aspects of information is first class.
Before we leave this subject, you know Sir David Amis, and what he would really like as his monument, because he talked about little else. He would like Southend to be named a city. Is that something the government could do?
Do you know, it brings a smile to me and it warms our heart, because I think one of his last PMQs, actually questions to the Prime Minister, I was in the chamber, was about Southend, and I know Southend is an Essex MP as well. Look, that's not for me to say at all. You know, there'll be working government on that. But
it could be done.
But all I would say, I mean, you know, we will always have. I think when David's name is mentioned going forward, he will just bring great cheer and smiles to everybody, because he was Mr. Southend, he was Mr. Essex. You know, he would always put Southend front and centre of his work, and that was David through and through.
Well, let's turn to something that I'm sure is front and centre of your day-to-day work, which is the migrant crisis going on at the moment. In 2019, you promised that you'd make channel crossings an infrequent phenomenon. And then last year, in August, you said you were working to make the route unviable. Now, so far, 18,000 people have come across in 2021, and that's already more than double the 2020 numbers. So when are you going to get a grip?
So first of all, we are seeing unprecedented numbers of people, not just crossing the channel or trying to cross the channel, but actually migrants moving around the world. And you just have to look at a lot of the work that takes place upstream. I should also say post-Afghanistan as well. Look at migrant flows and the migrant crisis that are still building up there as well. Pakistan border, Iran border, etc., etc. But you have specifically, and rightly so, challenged and questioned me about crossings from France.
Yeah.
There is no magic solution to this. There is no one solution that is going to stop this, which is why, in terms of the grip that we are bringing, we are working with France, Belgium, near neighbours, around border security and upstream activity based on intelligence and stopping the criminality. This is a criminal network. This is based on criminality. This isn't individuals individually buying boats. This is all networked, and there's a lot of work. There has
but it's
also,
not working,
Andrew,
is my point.
Well,
it's not working at the moment.
Well, there are a range of things that we're doing. If I may, I'll come on to that. In the last 12 months alone, the number of attempted crossings has gone up by 140% compared to last year. There have been over 10,000 preventions this year. So when I say this year, I'm speaking January to August this year by France. So we can't say that it's not working. Interceptions are working. The French police, who we are supporting, the gendarmerie, we have a lot of work taking place with France on intelligence and also policing and providing resourcing. That is working, but also the numbers are going up, which leads me then, Andrew, to some of the measures that we are bringing in place. Again, none of this will be fixed overnight, and I'm very vocal about this. As you know, I've spoken about this many times. No short-term solution, no quick win, no quick fix. That is why we are changing our legislation in the United Kingdom, the Nationality and Borders Bill.
So
we have to end many of the pull factors that are bringing people to the United Kingdom. We want to stop the criminality. We are increasing penalties for people smugglers. We're doing much more in terms of intelligence and cooperation and that sharing upstream as well. We want to do much more on returns agreements. There's a panoply of activity that we are doing.
It's just that we keep reading about one measure and then another measure, British vessels turning back boats.
Yes.
And, you know, what happens if people jump off the boats? There doesn't seem to be any easy answer to this.
Well, this is a complicated issue. I come back to my point. There is no one solution that will fix this. If it was, believe you me, I'm sure all my predecessors would have resolved this previously. And actually, speaking to my predecessors, I also recognise much of the work that was undertaken to stop illegal migration. Let's not forget, throughout the pandemic, there's been less air travel, there have been fewer lorry movements, hence the reason why there's more illegal migration through this very visible medium of channel crossings. It is completely,
it doesn't sound, Home Secretary, as if you expect the situation to get any better anytime soon.
We're working to absolutely go after the people smugglers and reduce the number of crossings. Let me be very clear about this, and I'd say this to your viewers as well. This is the work of this government, and it is night and day. There is no complacency here, but it is difficult. That is why we're bringing the Nationality and Borders Bill forward. That is why we're bringing legislation forward. Okay. That is why Border Force have new powers and will have new powers in terms of returning boats or pushing back, but also intercepting at sea. All within the law, I should say, as well.
Sure.
All within the law.
Let me turn to one of the other big issues facing the country this winter, which is COVID. Cases are way up, hospitalisations are way up, deaths are beginning to rise as well. Have we got the virus under control?
I think it's important to reflect. as to where we are now compared to where we were. I mean, last winter, last Christmas, I mean, it was difficult. It was absolutely difficult. Parts of the country were locked down. We were taking very, very strong measures. I think the biggest change, of course, now, Andrew, from where we were last year to this year is that we are living with this virus. We are all living with this virus. And of course, this year has been dominated by the vaccine rollout programme, which has fundamentally shifted the landscape and where we are literally looking to, I think, the next few months on the virus.
So let me ask you about the next few months, because we're all watching hospitalisations and they are beginning to rise quite fast. We're going through Plan A at the moment, but you have Plan B as a government, which is, you know, a return to home working, mandatory masks, and vaccine passports. So my question, is whether Plan B is going to be definitely enough.
Well, I think first of all, you've mentioned hospitalisations, because clearly hospitalisations right now are nowhere near, thankfully, nowhere at the level that they have been previously. And we have the vaccine. The vaccine is central to that. And obviously people are not as unwell and not as ill as they had been previously. So boosters rollout continues, and obviously the vaccine is going to school-age children now as well, which will all help, which will absolutely all help.
And the one thing you won't do is close schools under any circumstances.
But this is the point. This is why, and I've been involved working with the health secretary and others in terms of making sure we continue. We've got to live with the virus, but ensure that all the protective measures are in place, and that's absolutely virus. We want to protect people's health and well-being.
Priti Patel, Home Secretary, thanks very much indeed for coming in to talk to us today. That is all from me. We're out of time. Next week I'm going to be joined by the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, ahead of the budget. But until then, goodbye.